And yet, even with a completely divided and angry public, President Biden says the road ahead will be business as usual.
You mentioned that Americans are frustrated, and in fact, 75% of voters say the country is heading into the wrong direction. Despite the results of last night, what in the next 2 years do you intend to do differently to change people's opinion of the direction of the country, particularly as you contemplate a run for president in 2024?
Nothing, because they're just finding out what we're doing. The more they know about what we're doing, the more support there is.
Nothing. And now, before the ink is even dry, GOP senators will vote on leadership positions this upcoming week as some GOPers look to unseat Mitch McConnell and talk swirls around Kevin McCarthy. Why vote in leadership elections so soon? And will the GOP keep Mitch McConnell in place? And we begin this Sunday morning with a deep dive into why the midterm red wave predicted by so many political pundits did not materialize. As control of the House is still up for grabs, currently in the House, Republicans have 211 seats, compared to the Democrats with 205 seats. 218 seats needed to clinch the majority. And over in the Senate, Democrats will retain control with a minimum of 50 seats, with Georgia still in play ahead of the runoff in December. All of this coming as Americans have been dealing with 40-year high inflation due to President Biden's tax and spend policies, an issue most voters said was a top priority. Joining us right now to examine the reasons for the lackluster performance by Republicans is the former White House senior advisor, Stephen Miller. Stephen, it's great to see you this morning. Thanks for being here.
Absolutely.
Let's talk about your thinking here. What are the reasons, in your view, the Republicans underperformed?
There's three very important considerations to understand what happened. Republicans won the popular vote by between 5 to 6 million votes. We'll see what that ultimately comes down to, but about a 4 percentage point edge. So the first question you ask is, how is it possible on a national basis for millions more ballots to be cast for Republicans overall, but to lose the Senate and to have a cliffhanger in the House? And the biggest and number one reason for that is Democrat mastery of mail-in balloting, vote harvesting, and the machinery of the early vote in these states where they're voting for weeks, if not months, before the election. So in very tight swing states, where it's going to be decided by a few percentage points, they can swing the outcome by collecting ballots in extremely low propensity areas and with extremely low propensity voters and bank those ballots long before Election Day ever happens. There's no such thing as Election Day anymore. Take, for example, a case like Pennsylvania, to be concrete about this. So Oz leaves a bruising and bloody primary. And as is normal, what happens when you leave a bruising and bloody primary? You're going to be down in the polls against your general election opponent. So what happens? Early voting starts. Harvesting starts. Unsolicited mail-in ballots are sent out for weeks when Oz is behind in the polls. When he's 10 down and then 5 down and then 3 down and then 2 down. When he has the debate and he wins and he comes up ahead on Election Day, it's too late. The old rules, the old horse race that you and I and our viewers today follow their whole lives doesn't apply anymore. Yeah. When the Republican candidate closes strong, it's too late. That's reason number one.
So Election Day is no longer Election Day. That's number one. What's number two?
The financial disparity between the Democrats and Republicans is still enormous, particularly at the top of the ticket. Here I'll use Arizona as the example. Blake Masters left his primary, again, a long and difficult primary, as they often are, and Mark Kelly had a $55 million campaign war chest, plus outside groups. They drowned Blake in the first month with $30 million in negative ads, before Blake even had his first ad on TV. And in this context, we have to note the extraordinarily fateful decision on the part of the Senate Leadership Fund and Mitch McConnell to take the money that should have been spent in Arizona to get Blake up on TV early on and instead give it to Lisa Murkowski for a Republican battle against the Republican-backed nominee in Alaska. And if you want to find one state where that extra $6 to $9 million would have been the difference maker. That's it, Arizona. The disparity at the top of the ticket was crushing for our candidates.
Yeah, that's a great point. So the money that he spent for Lisa Murkowski should have gone to Arizona behind Blake Masters. Okay, money number two. Number three, what's the third issue?
Number three is the need to win independent voters by seizing on winning wedge issues and fighting for them with every breath that you have. Democrats do this, Republicans don't. Look at, for example, the abortion issue, all right? Democrats don't need it to be a majority issue. They just need it to be an issue that they can target and activate the right voters with overwhelming enthusiasm. Every single voter in this country who cares about abortion knows with certainty that if Democrats get the House and the Senate, they will codify abortion on demand through 9 months. And they know it. They absolutely know it. By contrast, is there any voter in this country who believes that if Republicans won the House and the Senate, that they would immediately shut down the border crisis, that they would move heaven and earth, shut the government down if they had to seal up that southern border, to save this country from open borders? Nobody believes that. But unlike abortion, that is an 80-20 issue. And so is crime. That's an 80-20 issue. And so is gender. 80-20 issues. But if you just have them as election day talking points, you're not going to break through the funding disparity. You're not going to break through the media bias. You're not going to break through to independent voters. You're not going to break through to any human being alive in a swing state, and so you're going to lose these close races because the Republican brand set by Mitch McConnell on down is not exciting, is not persuasive, is not convincing to voters.
Really important analysis there. Very well done. I got to get your take before you go, what this means for 2024 and what this means for leadership. They're going to be having elections this upcoming week in the Senate. A number of senators said, whoa, this is too early. Ron Johnson is going to be with us coming up. Rick Scott is going to be with us coming up. Marco Rubio, Ted Cruz tweeted, let's push off the elections for the leadership. What is your take?
I unequivocally associate myself with the senators that you just mentioned. It would be preposterous to hold leadership elections before the midterms are over, before Georgia is done, and before we have all the data to understand what happened in these close swing states and its effects all the way down the ballot. And to your other question, what needs to happen is that Senate Republicans who have the power of the filibuster and therefore can put Democrats on defense in that body, they need to have a clear understanding of what are the 3 or 4 issues that they are going to fight for tooth and nail every single day, so that even a voter who doesn't follow news, who doesn't pay attention to Washington, even that voter will be reached by the understanding of what Republicans care about and what they are willing to fight for.
Well, I think Kari Lake has made that her issue, and she's coming up. She'll talk about that. People believe she will declare an emergency for the border. Stephen, thank you. Former White House Senior Advisor Stephen Miller here. Joining me right now is Florida Senator Rick Scott. He is the chairman of the National Republican Senatorial Committee. Senator, it's good to see you this morning. Thanks so much for being here. I know that you have been circulating a letter along with Senator Ron Johnson, pressing colleagues to sign on to a postponement of next week's elections in terms of leadership positions. But top senators are saying they're going to push forward, even though the ink is not even dry. What are your thoughts on the elections next week?
Well, first off, it doesn't make any sense. So I've been in the Senate for 4 years. I'm a business guy, and here's what I've watched. In business, you have a plan. You know your numbers. All right. I've been up here 4 years. What is our plan? It's like Stephen Miller talked about. What is our plan? What are we running on? What do we stand for? What are we hell-bent to get done? There's no plan to do that. The leadership in the Republican Senate says, no, you cannot have a plan. We're just going to run against how bad the Democrats are. And actually then they cave into the Democrats. So, and then now they want to rush through an election. We haven't even finished what's happened in Georgia. My focus is to make sure Herschel wins, and I hope everybody helps Herschel. You can go to teamherschel.com to help, teamherschel.com. But they want to rush through an election because, they don't want to do any assessment of what we've done wrong. Insanity is doing the exact same thing and thinking you're going to get a different result. We won't.
Well, we have tweets here that I want to show from Marco Rubio, from Ted Cruz, saying we should postpone the Senate leadership elections next week. A lot of people are wondering if Mitch McConnell is the guy to continue running it. Will you take the job if your colleagues push you to want to become minority leader? Do you want the job?
Well, a lot of people have called me to see if I'll run. Here's my focus: we still got to win Georgia. I'm not going to take anything off the table, but my job right now is to do everything I can help Herschel with. I'm going to be there today helping Herschel. So that's what my focus is. We shouldn't be having these elections, but we've got to go back and say to ourselves, when Republicans do what leadership has done this last year, and our candidates have to be frustrated with, the Republican leadership caving in on the debt ceiling, caving in on a gun bill, caving in on a fake infrastructure bill, and then we make it difficult for our candidates. We can't do that, and we got to do exactly what Stephen Miller said. Give people something we're hell-bent on getting done, and then fight for it. That's what we do in Florida, by the way. I did when I was governor. That's what's been happening since I left. That's why we have big wins in Florida, because we stand for something.
Well, look, you did stand for something. You had an 11-point agenda that you released earlier this year, but what did some of your colleagues do? They turned that agenda against you and started sending out this news that you wanted to eliminate Social Security. Go through your agenda. What is most important to you, Senator Rick Scott?
So first off, I think we've got to save Social Security and save Medicare. And I explained, the Democrats have voted to to cut Medicare, but we've got here's what Mitch McConnell said. When I put out my plan, he said, we're not going to have a plan. We're just going to talk about how bad the Democrats are. We can't do that. We got to say, what are our ideas? And let's fight over those ideas, and let's act like a caucus and win on those ideas. People agree with us. They don't like inflation. They don't like an open border. They don't like $31 trillion worth of debt. In the last 16 years, the debt has gone from $9 to $31 trillion. We got to change. It's hurting our families. I grew up poor, Maria. I mean, my family was dealing with inflation when I was growing up. I watched that. It's hurting our families. We got to deal with these issues.
Yeah, but how do you deal with it? I mean, you and your colleagues talked a lot about inflation before the election. Voters were very clear that they felt inflation and the economy and crime were the top issues, and you still underperformed.
Because we didn't have a plan. I mean, because because leadership said, no, we're not going to have a plan. Look, I balanced the budget as governor of Florida. Was it easy? No. The state had not balanced its budget in 20 years before I got elected. We have to go through and start watching how we spend our money, stop teaming up with the Democrats, caving with them on spending bills. We got to deal with the debt ceiling. We got to say, we're not going to just keep raising the debt ceiling without structural reform. We can do these things, but we've got to start coming together as a caucus, not vote with the Democrats.
Well, that's what so many of your colleagues did. We've got a graphic right here to show our viewers who exactly caved to the Democrats when it came to the CHIPS Act, when it came to the Infrastructure Act. You were in a position of strength, and then you've got all of these colleagues here voting for the CHIPS Act, caving to the Democrats. Did you all blow it by caving in and going with Democrats? Is that why you're now going to be in the minority?
Maria, why? So think about it. You're a candidate like Marco Rubio running, all right? And then the colleagues go and vote for things that he's campaigning against. How's that make his race easy? Or any of our challengers? How's it make their race easy? So we've got to come together as a caucus and vote as a caucus. And that's not what's happening. You have these people voting with Chuck Schumer.
Yeah. When will we know if you delay the elections next week? Because you're not going to be able to challenge Mitch McConnell if you have elections next week, right?
I guess the Democrats delayed their election. I don't know why we wouldn't, but I guess we won't know until Tuesday or Wednesday.
That's a good point. The Democrats are not doing their elections until December. So why are you doing it next week? Senator, we're going to keep following this, and we're going to keep a spotlight on it. Florida Senator Rick Scott joining us this morning. Thank you, sir. We will keep watching all of that. Well, welcome back. GOP Senate leadership is pushing forward to hold leadership elections this upcoming Wednesday, despite efforts to delay the elections until after the membership assesses what went wrong with Republicans this midterm season. Ron Johnson circulating a note asking to push back next week's vote timing, to time it closer to what Democrats are doing, which is holding their elections in early December. My next guest has also been at the forefront of looking into Hunter Biden's influence peddling and his business deals and the politicization of the DOJ and the FBI. Senator Ron Johnson has also won re-election in Wisconsin, defeating Democrat challenger Mandela Barnes by about 26,000 votes to secure a third term. So what can we expect from the GOP when the new Congress begins in January, and why push ahead with leadership elections so soon after the midterms? Joining me right now is the man himself, Senator Ron Johnson. Senator, it's good to see you. Thanks very much for being here.
Good morning, Maria.
So do you think we are going to see those elections next week, and why do you believe they should be postponed?
Well, I hope not, and I agree with Stephen Miller. It'd be preposterous to hold elections before we even know that we have a senator from Georgia or who our senator from Alaska is going to be. Plus, I agree with Rick Scott. We need to do a real assessment of what went wrong. The last 2 years we had, as you put up on a graphic there, we had a number of our colleagues join Democrats, spending like drunken sailors. I heard repeatedly when they joined in, for example, the infrastructure spending bill, rather than repurpose $700 billion from the COVID relief and apply that to our infrastructure inside the conferences, well, infrastructure spending so popular, let's spend more than $1 trillion. That obviously was not a winning message or a winning agenda. That was a losing message, a losing agenda, and we need to discuss that internally. We need to have thorough discussions internally. And as I talked to my colleagues before I left town, if I survived re-election, we need a different governing model for our conference that's far more collaborative, that is more business-like. That's another thing that I liked what Rick talked about. As a business person, you come into the dysfunction that is not only Washington, D.C. and Congress, but our conference. I mean, we don't discuss numbers. We don't have an organized format for laying out, how we should come down, how we should set agenda on some of these major issues. Yeah. So we need serious discussions. We can't have those in a couple of days. That's going to take about a month. And I think Democrats are smart in terms of delaying their elections till, I think, the first week in December. We ought to follow suit.
Well, I mean, you wrote about this in a recent op-ed for the Wall Street Journal, writing a governing agenda for Senate Republicans. Then you've got the Democrats saying we're not going to hold leadership elections until early December. But Mitch McConnell is in charge, and nobody wants to go against him, I guess, because he's the one who's deciding who's going to get to run committees. So what are you going to do about it?
Well, Maria, think about it. If we hold those elections right away Wednesday, you probably have more campaigning done in a high school class president election than we would have in the most deliberative body in the world. It is absurd. It is preposterous. They need to be delayed. We need to have these discussions.
Well, let's also talk about what's possible now that we know it's likely that the Democrats are going to have the majority in the Senate. Next week, you've got Christopher Wray testifying in front of the Homeland Security Committee, your committee. What are you going to ask him? And are you going to continue your deep dive investigation on the DOJ, on the FBI, on the Biden family influence peddling?
Well, I've got a number of questions. I only get 7 minutes probably, so I'll have to pick and choose based on what other people have asked him before me or in the House. But I've got a long list of oversight letters to the FBI. I've got no answers from them at all. Here's one right here. Who directed the briefing to Senator Grassley and I that was a setup used to smear me later on? 2 years later, a number of public letters, I still don't know who directed that FBI briefing, which was a complete setup. So I'll be asking him that for sure, and now that he's aware of that, he better have an answer for me.
Well, I mean, look, people want to understand when this politicization in the FBI started. You have been doing this deep dive and have actually gotten real information about Hunter Biden and the way the Biden family tries to get money, line their own pockets, and then Joe Biden has to make decisions on behalf of America. How's Joe Biden going to protect America meeting Xi Jinping tomorrow when we know he's taking in all that money from Chinese officials tied to the CCP?
It's obvious that President Biden is highly compromised because of Hunter Biden's money influence peddling, and that's what it was. And of course, the FBI has known about this probably going back to 2014, 2015, when you had prosecutions or investigations of Devon Archer, Hunter Biden's business partner. So this corruption has been going back quite a few years. It needs to be fully exposed. Hopefully, I'll have my budget restored. In the last Congress, I will be ranking member of the Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations. Our budget was cut back to about 60 or 70% of what it was from my committee chairman and the ranking member. That funding needs to be restored so I have enough staff to do the proper investigations.
Well, are you going to get your budget restored? Who cut your budget?
Well, that would be the chairman of the committee, Senator Peters, and the ranking member, Rob Portman. So hopefully our new ranking member will still the same chairman, but hopefully the new ranking member will restore the funds necessary to really conduct the type of investigations that the permanent subcommittee investigation was designed to do.
And you feel that you'll be able to still conduct proper investigations even though you won't have subpoena power, right?
Correct, but we also do have things like FOIA requests, and we've done quite a bit with that. Remember the 4,000 pages of Fauci emails that were FOIA'd? We looked at those. We identified 400 of those pages that were heavily redacted. Congress isn't subject to redaction, so we've pressured HHS. They've allowed us to see 350 of those pages. It's interesting that they will not allow us to look at 50 of those pages that are still redacted. I think we know kind of where the real incriminating evidence is.
All right, so real quick before you go, number one, do you expect any news out of the Xi Jinping-Joe Biden meeting? And number two, are you going to delay the leadership elections in the Senate next week?
Well, I'm doing everything I can to just appeal to reason and rationality with my colleagues. It would be absurd to hold these leadership elections. We have a lot to discuss. We have information. Are we going to have a senator from Georgia? Who's our senator going to be from Alaska? In a close election, that can make all the difference. It would be absurd. It would be wrong to hold leadership elections on Wednesday.
Joe Biden and Xi Jinping meeting tomorrow? What do you expect?
It's hard to say. We'll get some kind of readout from it. But again, I just, my feeling is that Joe Biden is highly compromised. Why else would we cancel the China initiative, the DOJ program designed to investigate China's theft of our intellectual property from colleges and universities? It made no sense whatsoever. There's only one explanation. Joe Biden is compromised.
I've been asking the question for months since they canceled the China initiative. Absurd. Wisconsin Senator Ron Johnson, we so appreciate your time. Thank you, sir. We'll be watching next week.